Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hey, what's happening, Rush Nation? Here we are. It's week one. It's week one of the NFL season. We are there. We are just 24 hours and a little bit more away from live football back in hands for the next 21 or so weeks. It's unbelievable. Cannot believe it. It's been a long summer. Lots happened. Lots of talk. Lots of changes for players, changing teams. Lots of coaching changes. Lots of offensive coordinator changes. Lots of personal stuff and everything, but here we are. We are here, and we are here to kick off week one in style. So I guess before we get into the waiver wire picks for this week, I'll just give you the content schedule for the rest of the regular season. So this will normally drop on a Monday, but figured that there's not a big pressing need for this on a Monday when we can give this to you as sort of late as possible because you don't have the same waiver transactions prior to the start of week one. So, and it seems to be a good move with the latest injury to Travis Kelce. But there could have been other injury news as well. So giving this to you a little over 24 hours in advance is I think a slightly smarter move. But traditionally going forward from week two onwards, this will be Monday. So this will go out on the Monday. You've got the Dynasty show on a Tuesday. And then you'll have the matchup show on Wednesday. So I'll give you the first preview for the week. That'll be in line with rankings and giving you a view of all the games, talking about all the fantasy relevant players, where you should potentially think about starting them. So going through each game, every single fantasy player, giving you a bit of an idea of kind of where I've got them ranked and what I kind of expect from them for that week. Week 4 is the flagship. So we'll have some guests through the season. We'll do some all sorts of bits and pieces as well through that and review and preview. And then Friday, you've got Fast Action Friday. So you've got a lot of different content. There's also lots of written content on the site. There's going to be waiver wire articles, start sits, additional sort of fantasy stuff as well. So make sure you go check out all the work, all the great writers are doing at 5yardrush.co.uk. Apologies for no show on Thursday last week. Had a real life, a real job or a first job work need that meant I had to go and surface that. Stocks had his grandpa's birthday. So that happened and it's meant we weren't able to record. So was looking forward, had a great guest lined up as well. It's just one of those things that unfortunately just didn't happen. But that's unfortunately part and parcel of the real world. So apologies for that. Hopefully we won't miss any more for the regular season. We should be good to go. But yeah, that's apologies for that. That's the schedule for the rest of the season. So make sure, good thing, there's content every single weekday for you to get you prepped for your fantasy matchups and all lined up. So plenty of things going on. Make sure you subscribe to the show. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe on Spotify to get all the latest episodes and all the latest content. Also, you can subscribe to Patreon as well. For as little as £1 a month, you get access to the WhatsApp group and access to me sharing advice and things. And there's a good group of strong fantasy players in there, so you've got access to that. So make sure you join the Patreon too. It's patreon.com/5yardrush. There's different tiers and you get different levels of goodies and bits and pieces as well with that. So make sure you tap into that and get access to me and access to exclusive Patreon casts and Patreon podcasts and access to review teams. And also that's where all the questions I'll answer will get first priority. So those that DM me with fantasy questions, I try my best to get to as many of them, but sometimes real world gets in the way. So if you're a patron, I will always answer your question and you'll get it immediately or as quickly as I can. Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it, might be a little bit slower. So that's going to do it. So let's move over to the waiver wire. And so we'll start off, first of all, how I'm going to break this down is those around about the 50% mark, then those that are under 30%, and then those that are effectively free are going to be free in most leagues. And I do that because of the different levels of leagues that people play in. I don't really want to talk about players that are over 50% owned. That's kind of pointless because they're effectively going to be not available in the leagues for the people that we're playing. So that would be listening to this anyway. So I'm going to do around about the 50% mark and then under 30%. And then, pretty much your under 10% or even lower. So that's kind of how this format's going to work. So we'll start with the quarterback. Oh, and last thing, all ownership is on ESPN. There's a reason I use ESPN for ownership. Pure and simple. Sleepers ownership numbers include Dynasty, which isn't particularly helpful because you're going to have players that are owned in Dynasty that aren't owned in redraft. And that's going to shove the ownership up. And I don't find that the ownership numbers are as accurate as a result, especially as well. Not that we're going to do IDP in the waiver wires, but all those sort of numbers kind of get skewed. ESPN numbers are pure redraft numbers, so that's kind of why I use ESPN because it sticks to that and keeps it separate. So let's start here with quarterbacks. Sorry, just moved my screen. It's just gone completely awry here. 1 second. This is terrible audio. Okay, so let's go through to quarterbacks. First quarterback I'll talk about is Jared Goff. Jared Goff is 49% owned. So you're looking at a player that was just outside the top 12 last season. He's going to have a good start against KC on Friday or Thursday night, Friday morning, which means the ball's going to be in hands a lot because they're going to be behind. He's going to throw the ball a lot. He's definitely an option if you lose a quarterback early. He's a good addition to your squad. So if you're looking at quarterbacks this week, for some reason you have a sudden need for one, Jared Goff is definitely the best option out there. Also, just looking at potential quarterbacks that could do quite well through the season. I've got my eye on two here, and I'm not suggesting you pick them up yet, but these are players you want to keep an eye on. Bryce Young, he's 18.7% owned. And actually, his ownership's dipping. It's actually gone down nearly 2% this week. And I guess that's teams that are perhaps structuring their teams differently. So Bryce Young is a player that I'd be keeping an eye on. Another one is Jordan Love, 15.9% owned. So the thing with Jordan Love is he's a player that they've held on to for 3 years in Green Bay. And he's someone who has had some small success on the field when he's covered Aaron Rodgers. So it's not like he's not played for 3 years. He's just not played much. But he's a player that, they have strong belief in. They traded away Aaron Rodgers because they believe this guy is the future of the franchise. They took him in the first round because they believe he's the future of the franchise. So he's being stepped on a little bit too much for me. So he's a player to keep an eye on. But I think if you've taken a quarterback early, then there's no need to be having a backup quarterback on your bench. But there's 3 quarterbacks I would definitely be looking at. And especially Goff for his week 1 matchup. I think it's a good matchup. Mind you, Bryce Young's matchup as well against Atlanta is another one I'd be really keen to potentially attack. But it is a rookie. It's his first game. I wouldn't be as confident starting him in that one. Moving on to the running backs. So there's a couple of running backs here that are well worth attacking just under that 50% threshold. There's 2 here. One, Jaylen Warren, 48.1%. There's some belief from the beat writers there that there's every chance he could potentially win that job overall. I'm not sure if I believe that, and especially don't believe it early, but with Najee Harris potential injury struggles last season, he sort of played hurt the whole year. It could be interesting to see how they manage Jaylen Warren. So he's a nice pickup here, especially as you should be loading your benches with as many running backs as you can. Another one, Tyler Algier, 45% owned. Atlanta are going to run the ball a lot. Like, they're going to run the ball. You can tell by their wide receiver core that they're going to run the ball a lot. So just because Bijan's there doesn't necessarily mean that Algier is not going to have a role. He's going to have a very strong role. So I like having him, given the amount that they have one of the lowest passing attempts of teams in the league. They were ranked 31st last season. There hasn't been any major personnel changes to suggest that's going to be much different this year. So they're definitely going to be hovering around that sort of bottom 5 in passing attempts, which means they're going to run the ball a lot more. So Tyler Algier is going to be a big, strong role for him. And then if Bijan, for some reason, gets hurt, then you really are at the races, because Tyler Algier had a phenomenal year and he's going to have very little competition behind him. So definitely like having him on some benches. Deion Jackson, 36.4% owned. He's going to get the start for the Colts this week because there is no Zach Moss. Zach Moss looks likely to be out this week, depending whether or not he's going to be out next week as well. So definitely like adding him this week. Again, it's just going to be him and Evan Hull. So I see Deion Jackson getting the majority of the work here early on. Devin Akane is another one here, 26.3% owned. He's a player that I think is potentially going to end up as the number 1 on this roster. I know that the Dolphins have looked to bring somebody in via trade. Jonathan Taylor's been the most public one. They also looked at Dalvin Cook, but ultimately there isn't anyone there. So the fact they keep looking and they've drafted Akane, that says to me that Akane has a chance to vault himself up this roster and get some work. So he's a nice one I'd grab now while you can and keep an eye on him. Donta Foreman is 16.3% owned. He is someone that I believe will start off as the starter. I could be totally wrong here, but I firmly believe he's going to be the starter for the Bears. Although one to watch is Roschon Johnson, 23.7% owned. Don't be surprised if Roschon Johnson, if it doesn't work well for Donta Foreman, don't be surprised to see Roschon Johnson be the guy who monopolizes and takes over that backfield altogether. And now we're going to look at 10%. So these are players that are pretty much free in almost all of your leagues. Jerome Ford is the first one. He's 10% owned. Jerome Ford is effectively walking into the Kareem Hunt role for the last few years. So the way you're looking at this is a run-first team in Nick Chubb and Ford. Ford is going to be the number 2, so he's immediately going to get immediate work, flex-worthy work most weeks, but he also becomes a premium handcuff because if and when Chubb goes down, because he goes down most years and misses multiple games every year, Ford is the premium handcuff to get the majority of the work. And they believed in this guy enough to cut Kareem Hunt. Now, listen, some of that was cap related as well, but they still had to have the talent behind. This is a coaching staff that will be pressured into making the playoffs this year. So they're not going to deliberately make their team weaker unless they believe they've got the talent there. And so, for me, Jerome Ford is a must-have in all leagues. So I'd be picking him up and using him as much as possible. And then the other player I'd be looking at is Sean Tucker, 1% owned. This is a long-term play. Sean Tucker's going to start the year as the number 2 back in Tampa. Tampa will use 2 backs this season. Everyone's been thinking it's Chase Edmonds. It's not Chase Edmonds. Chase Edmonds, if you've got Chase Edmonds on your roster, drop him. He is done. He is done for fantasy relevance. He's not going to be fantasy relevant this season. It is going to be Sean Tucker. Sean Tucker is proven to be quite a strong candidate. The fact he's vaulted himself from an undrafted free agent to this high up on the roster, but he had a great college career as well. It was a bit of a surprise he went undrafted. So Sean Tucker for me is a guy that you want to be keeping an eye on. I'd be adding him everywhere you can if he is available, especially if you've got quite a few bench spots. Sean Tucker's the guy I'd be adding because if something doesn't quite work with Rashad White or they need that change of pace back, then Sean Tucker is going to be that guy. I still think Rashad White is going to have a very good season, but don't be surprised. The way we've seen the Bucs offense the last few years, they have used both running backs, and that's been Jones and Fournette, or Fournette and White. So, they will operate with the second running back, and Tucker will get that workload. It will start slow. It will build up. I'm not saying you start him week 1, but he's a player I would certainly be adding in as many spots as you can. Moving on to the wide receivers, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky, but there's still some good value out there. Some guys I'd be targeting just to keep an eye on. The first one I would look at, I was just seeing some breaking news here that Carl Nassib, the NFL's first openly gay player, has retired from the NFL, which is a shame. I'd like to have seen him come back. He played for the Buccaneers, of course. Excellent guy. So that's some breaking news for you right here on the pod. So yeah, some guys under. There's no one under that 50% to 30% threshold, with the exception of Zay Jones. He's 30.6% owned. Zay Jones had a really good season last year as a flex sort of wide receiver. And I know people are saying, well, Calvin Ridley's there now. There's more competition for targets, but Zay Jones earned his. And I think you're going to see more of a dip from Kirk. And you might see Ridley lose a little. You might see Jones lose a little bit, but I don't think you're going to see him lose too much. I think he's going to operate in that small sort of mid-range, short to mid-range level. And I think he's someone that will continue to gain targets. He's not going to score many touchdowns, but in the PPR league in particular, he's someone that's good for, sort of 5-6 receptions a week for that sort of mid yardage. You're looking at 10, 11 points. It's not a huge amount, but it's someone that he could potentially get a lot more, especially if he gets targets in the game early and he makes plays early, then he's the sort of player that will keep getting retargeted. But I like having players like that just as a safe flex option on the bench. So he's someone that you could definitely look at. Jonathan Mingo, 20.3% owned. He's competing for for targets in Carolina. And you've got a coaching team there that brought in a brand new set of wide receivers in Thielen and Chark and now Mingo, who they drafted. Hard to tell who's actually going to. I think Thielen's going to be the dominant, especially the dominant red zone guy. But I think there's plenty of targets out there for players to pick up on. And don't forget, you haven't got Christian McCaffrey there anymore, monopolizing a load of targets. And then you've got Miles Sanders, but he's not been a phenomenal catcher of the ball. So I think you're looking at, there's a lot of targets in play. Almost all the targets from last season have been vacated. So Mingo's a flyer because he's one that could easily pick up a really significant role very, very early and build that relationship with Bryce Young, and with the draft capital as well. Could point to that way as well. Similar story for Romeo Dobbs. Say 19% owned Romeo Dobbs. And at the end of the day, similar story. We know that Watson's going to be the one in Green Bay, but there's a huge fight with the youngest wide receiver core in the NFL for the two. I would say Dobbs, however you want to pronounce him. I say Dobbs, but some people say Doobs. Will get the nod in that 2 role. And I think any wide receiver 2 is definitely a worthy option, especially as they've got Chicago. So I definitely think that's a game that could be a bit of a dogfight, and I think they'll rely on players that they already know first. So I expect him to get some work. And I can even say a similar story for Van Jefferson, 18% owned here. So Van Jefferson is a really interesting one because he's the wide receiver 2. You've got no Cup this week, so really he's the 1. And then the only player on the roster, the only players on the roster that have caught targets previously, Tyler Higbee at tight end, not a huge target volume player. And then Tutu Atwell, who is tiny. So Van Jefferson on the outside, could see him getting a lot of work, especially if Cooper Kupp is going to be out week 1, which is what we all kind of expect to happen. So really like adding him. His ownership's gone up 8% this week with the news of Kupp. Not a surprise. I would definitely be having, if you've got a few injury concerns, a bit of a worry at flex, Van Jefferson's a player I'd certainly be adding this week and then seeing how he gets on for future weeks. If you're looking for slightly longer term plays here, there's a couple. Rashad Bateman, 17.9% owned. Bateman's been awesome in fantasy when he's been fit. He just hasn't been fit all that often. The fact that you can pick him up for basically free now in most leagues suggests to me that he's well worth picking up. I still think he is the secondary target, and I think with the way that Todd Monken's going to coach this offense, you're going to see more out of Bateman if he stays healthy. So I really like having him on my rosters. I've got him on quite a few places where I've even drafted him as a result. Another one, Marvin Mims Jr., 13.5% owned. His ownership's gone up nearly 6% this week. And again, with Marvin Mims, you've got an injury to Jerry Jeudy, so Sutton, Mims. They invested a big high pick on Mims. I think he's going to get some work. Might take a little bit of time to get going, but he's a player I would look to be having on rosters if you've got the spaces on benches in particular. If we're going under the 10% threshold, 2 players to keep an eye on, or 3 actually. Jalen Hyatt, 7.2% owned. I think Jalen Hyatt probably is going to be the lead wide receiver target on this team. And the reason why they're all low owned is because no one knows. And that's a fair assumption that no one really knows where this is going to go as a team. So it's going to be an interesting one to see what happens. But I would be putting a few chips in on Jalen Hyatt, especially as it's not going to cost you anything. If you don't see anything after the next couple of weeks, then of course you can just drop him and, it hasn't cost you anything. So he's worth an ad for me. Tank Dell, 4.7% owned. Houston, bit of a wild card team. I think Robert Woods is the one. Everyone's talking about Nico Collins being the 2. I'm not so sure. I think that position they drafted 2 wide receivers. So I really think Tank Dell was impressed all through off season. He again could just be a bit of a flyer. You never know what you're going to get, but if you have a spare bench spot due to IRs, due to pups, he's a player I'd be looking to take a flyer on. Speaking of Robert Woods, 2.9% owned is Robert Woods. That is ridiculous. He's the Houston wide receiver 1 with a proven fantasy pedigree. And I know the Houston offense isn't going to be great, but in a PPR league, he's going to be peppered with targets. He's going to get a 30% target share. Now, I can't think of a time where a wide receiver with a 30% or near 30% target share is pretty much unowned in every league. That makes no sense to me. So Robert Woods, available in most leagues, I'd be going ahead and picking him up. And there's a couple more players. Michael Wilson's another one, 1.9% owned. Similar sort of boat in the sense of he's going to be the clear wide receiver 2, vested draft capital on him. Absolutely no one's talked about him, but he's the only sort of guy in Arizona with size. Everyone there is tiny, quick, short track star wide receivers. Michael Wilson is the alternative. And they're going to be behind a lot Arizona in games. And they're going to need to throw the ball, and they're going to need to throw it to a guy with contested catch ability, and Michael Wilson has that. So another option for you, just again, in those leagues where you've got a bit of extra bench space, you've got a bit of extra talent that you can use, or and you want to take a flyer on a guy that can make a difference later on in the season, there's a great couple of examples there that I can give you. Tight ends this week. Bit of a difficult position. There's 2 here under 50% owned that I'd be targeting. One is a Okonkwo, Chiga Okonkwo, 47.7% owned. He's up 8% this week in ownership. He's a player that I think is going to get used a fair bit, especially in that mid-range. You've got sort of big guys on the outside, but they haven't really got a slot receiver. So I think Chig is going to get effectively what be the alternative to the slot receivers. Also don't really have a receiving back because Derrick Henry doesn't catch a lot of passes. So there's a good opportunity for him to be probably a low-end tight end 1. So if you're out and you don't have Kelsey, if you've got Kelsey out this week, Chig's not a bad one to pick up. Nor is Gerald Everett. Quite a friendly game for him as well against Miami. 46% owned. That's up 5% this week. He could be a really good alternative. We all know about Gerald Everett. Has quite a storied career. Again, talking about probably low-end tight end 1 consideration for the rest of the season. I think I've got him outside of that, but he's someone that I think could be incredibly useful to have on your roster. Dipping down a bit to the lower percentages here. If you're looking for, there really isn't anyone in that sort of over 10% range that I'd want to be investing in too much right now. Maybe Dawson Knox. He's 12.1% owned. I think he's going to start well. And again, if you need a tight end now, Dawson Knox for week 1 might be a good feel, but not one I'd be investing too much on. If you're looking for the under 10% plays, the main one for me is Luke Musgrave. He's going to start for Green Bay immediately out of the traps. And I've already talked to you about all these vacated targets and young players in Green Bay. So there's plenty of opportunity there for someone to make a play. Luke Musgrave, 6.8% owned, is going to be that guy. He's easily going to be a sort of top 3 option in that offense, I think. And I think he's someone that, as Jordan Love gets acclimatized to this new look Green Bay Packers, he's going to get some work. And again, especially good matchup this week as well at Chicago. I like Luke Musgrave a lot and think he's well worth a pickup. He should be more than 6.8% owned. Also think Noah Fant could do something this year. I've got him at, wide receiver, tight end 2 range, 4.6% owned, but he's worth having a look, as is Trey McBride, 0.8% owned. I think they're done with Ertz. I think Trey McBride is going to be the starter who's going to get the majority of the work. That's who I would be looking at long term. Is there enough work there to make him viable? Hard to say. I think he gets to start week 1. They're playing the Commanders. I wouldn't say that's the best matchup for him. I'd probably look more at Musgrave if he's free. But Trey McBride is someone well worth keeping an eye on. So just keep an eye on him and see what happens there. Moving on to DSTs. The DST streamers of the week, there's a couple here that you can really target. The Falcons at 6.5%. They're playing against a rookie QB, likely to throw some picks. I actually do sneakily feel like Carolina could win that game. Sorry, Falcons fans. But, if you're looking for streaming options, the Falcons DST could be a really, really good option for you. As is the Vikings DST, 4% owned against Tampa. I think it's going to take time for that Tampa offense to get going. I don't think they're going to hit the ground running out of the blocks. And that's me being a pessimistic fan per se. So as a result, I think the Vikings DST is probably not a bad week 1 play to go at in particular. And then if you're looking, there's a few sort of slightly owned. The Jaguars are 18.7% owned. Their ownership's gone up a lot this week. So they're playing Indy. Again, Anthony Richardson, whole new offense, whole new coaching staff. Going to take a while to get going. I like playing them this week if you can get them on your waiver wire. They want to be targeting. And then right at 50% is the Commanders. They're playing Arizona. They're going to be playing Clayton Tune, who wasn't a highly drafted quarterback. I would be looking at them. If you can get Washington and you need a DST to stream this week, Washington would be a really, really good one to go and target. But they are 50% owned, so might not be available in your league. Kickers, do you really need a kicker? If you do, Cameron Dicker, 31.3% owned. I think he's going to get a lot of opportunities against Miami. He'd be a really good one to start this week. Another one potentially to start this week, Greg Joseph against Tampa inside, 9.1% owned. I think they'll put some points up this week. So I do like the look of that. Or Jason Sanders, 7.4%. If you're looking for a season-long kicker, Jason Sanders is about as good as it gets for consistency-wise. He's not going to challenge the top 5, but he's going to be a set-and-forget kicker. So if you're desperate for a kicker, didn't draft one, then he is your option to go to. That's going to do it for the Waiver Wire podcast. Sorry for the little break of audio in the middle there. Just had an internet issue, and then all of a sudden things wouldn't load. So I do apologize for that. I've tried to edit it out as best as possible, but if it's still come through, then apologies to you for that. Don't forget to check out all the content. As for the matchups pod, because this is going out on Wednesday, I'm going to drop the matchups pod tomorrow morning, and then we'll put we'll do the show out for the flagship after that in the evening. So tune in for those podcasts. Be doing a Patreon cast as well, so make sure you tune in to that one. But until then, Rush Nation, don't forget, as always, keep rushing and good luck with week 1.